Welcome to the third of our Lenten luncheons. My name is Shane Spangler, and I am the pastor of Bethany United Church of Christ in Hiawatha and Fairview United Church of Christ in Fairview. Today I'd like to read from Luke's Gospel, chapter 15, verses 11 to 31. This is the parable of the lost son, or what we might know better as the Prodigal Son parable. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" This is the good news of Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. If Jesus had a greatest hits album, then this parable certainly would be on it. The Prodigal Son parable, as we may have learned it. And we all probably know the main parts of it, of course. We just heard it. Father has two sons. The older one stays home, works on the farm. The younger one takes his share of the property and he wastes it, and he comes home nearly starved to death. Instead of punishing the younger son, the father forgives him and welcomes him back into the family. And so we are to forgive one another as God forgives us, just as the father in the parable forgives his wayward son when he comes home again. Now, there's nothing wrong with that understanding of Jesus' parable. But if we take it apart and look at it in the context of the Middle East, in the first century, but even today, by Middle Eastern standards to a large extent, we can begin to see why the religious and cultural and political authorities wanted to kill Jesus. Because he didn't just preach a good sermon and break a few Sabbaths. He threatened their entire reality. Now, this prodigal son parable is the third in a series of parables that Jesus preaches in response to the Pharisees' criticism. Luke says they were grumbling against Jesus because he welcomed tax collectors and sinners and he ate with them. Now, right away, Luke wants us to see the parallels to the Israelites grumbling against God in the desert. In fact, the word he uses is the same word as is used in the Greek translation of the book of Exodus. diagogudzo, to grumble. And Jesus preaches these parables in response to the criticism of the Pharisees and the scribes. And to us, he's teaching us a lesson, something vitally important about God. Now, the Pharisees and the scribes were the good religious people in Jesus' day. And they followed all the rules. They could quote scripture to you all day long. And they made sure everybody knew that they, the Pharisees, were the religious and moral authorities of society. They were the ones who knew what you were doing wrong. And they lumped sinners, adulterers, people with diseases, and those who broke the temple law all together, along with people with diseases. And they rejected them all as being beyond redemption. Now, there was a saying among Pharisees, which was actually written down. It said, "There is joy before God when those who provoke him perish from the world." Well, contrast this with what Jesus says in Luke 15:7. He says there's more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not have to repent. Jesus received these sinners. More than that, he ate with them. Now, we all know how sacred and beautiful it can be when we sit down together for a meal in our homes or in our churches. We look forward to that. In the Middle East, to sit down with another person and share a meal, it's almost a sacramental act. It is saying to the other person, I accept you totally and unconditionally. By eating with you, I declare that you and I are equals. And I am declaring this before the whole world. And this was a big problem for the Pharisees because it contradicted everything they taught and believed about judging others. And Jesus, by his parable, is saying to the Pharisees and scribes, yes, I eat with sinners and I welcome sinners because that's what the kingdom of God is all about. That is the heart of Jesus' ministry. And he says to the Pharisees, what are you going to do about it? Well, we know what they did about it, don't we? Now let's take a look at some of the plot points of Jesus' parable and see how this would have exploded the religious sensibilities of the good religious people in Jesus' day. First, let's look at the sins of the younger son in Jesus' parable. The younger son demands that the father give him his share of the property that will belong to him. Well, in this culture, the father's property was divided with his sons only after his death. And even on the rare occasions that a father would divide his property before he died, the father was still in control of his property before he died. So by demanding his share of the property now and in cash, the younger son treats his father as though he was already dead. He means absolutely nothing to the son. Now, notice how the son doesn't ask for his inheritance. Because if he had called it his inheritance, it would also mean that he accepted his leadership responsibility to his extended family and the community. He doesn't want responsibility. He just wants money so that he can go and do whatever he wants with it. And in that culture, in the Middle East, wealth was held in land and livestock. So to give his son his share, which would have been 1/3 of the property, which is prescribed in Deuteronomy 21:17, the father would have had to liquidate 1/3 of his property, and he would have had to do it quickly. And in the Middle East, even a small transaction takes a long time because people haggle and bargain with each other. So to sell 1/3 of his assets, and to do it quickly, the father would have taken a huge loss. Not just the father, but his older brother and the extended family, the entire family clan, which would have included potentially 100 people or more. They would have suffered because of the loss of 1/3 of the family, land, and animals. And so because of his selfishness, the younger son hurts not only his father, he hurts his family, his extended family, and the entire community that he lives in. He cuts himself off from his roots. And in that culture, your family was your inheritance. Your security in a village was your family, and your family was your insurance, your health care, your retirement, and your emotional support. Family was everything. So the younger son, by his demand for his share of the property, he breaks his father's heart and he breaks his relationships with his family, destroys his future. In this, Jesus wants us to see how when we sin, we not only break God's heart, but we break our relationships with one another. There's no such thing as private sin. Unforgiven sin is a poison that flows out into every relationship we have, beginning first with our relationship with God. Now, Jesus also wants us to understand that the elder son, the good son, is not good. He is also a sinner. We might have missed that if we didn't take the time to put this parable in context. The elder son does nothing to stop the younger son from doing this. Now, we live in a small community. Nobody can do anything bad in Hiawatha without people finding out about it. And it's even more so in the Middle East in a small community. The elder brother would have known that his little brother had demanded his property in cash and wanted it divided. Maybe the elder brother was right there when the younger son made his demand. But the elder son fails his father too, because the elder son's duty was to be the one to resolve disputes. He was to resolve family conflict. That was the job of the elder son in that community. He should have tried to mediate between the younger son and his father. He should have begged the younger son to stay, or at least explained to him the great harm that he would do to his family and to the community by insisting upon this division of the property. But he doesn't. He turns away from his younger brother. And by doing this, he becomes complicit in the sin of his younger brother. He's like the Pharisees. The older brother represents the Pharisees, the ones who pass judgment on others and turn their back and say, these people are beyond redemption. God hates them and so do I. It's a pretty good sign that we've created God in our own image when we decide that He hates all the same people we do. And that's what the Pharisees had done. That's what the older brother did. My younger brother has disobeyed the Scriptures and tradition. And so God hates him and will disown him. Could the elder brother have changed his younger brother's mind? Who knows? But he didn't try. The elder brother is the Pharisees, but he's also representative of us when we write people off as being beyond redemption. We might even be in the right, and they are clearly in the wrong. Okay, so what? In the eyes of God, nobody is just. If God dealt with us as we deserved, nobody would be able to stand before the Lord. Again, this is a parable, a teaching story, but the elements that Jesus includes are what make it incredible. The Father grants the Son's request for the property. In other words, the Father gives His Son permission to turn away from Him, but He doesn't disown the Son. If the Father had disowned the Son, then there would not have been any possibility of reconciliation ever. But He doesn't. And Jesus wants us to understand that when we choose to sin against God, God permits it. God permits us to turn away from Him. But He never disowns us because He always wants reconciliation with us. He wants to restore that relationship. Once we finally figure out that having our own way is not bringing us happiness that we thought it would, God hopes that we will want to reconcile. But when we sin, God gives us permission to turn away with tears in His eyes, just like the Father in Jesus' parable. He gives us permission to turn away and to hurt Him again and again. Now, away from the family and the village, the younger son uses up the money pretty quickly. in dissolute living, wild living, riotous living, and ends up taking a job feeding pigs. Now, pigs are unclean animals under the Mosaic law. So for the Pharisees, who were all about purity and they were all about following the law of Moses, this would have meant the younger son was not only sinful, not only selfish, but he had aligned himself with the Gentiles because he was living with pigs. For a Jewish person in Jesus' day, this younger son had fallen as far as you could fall. There was no turning back. This younger son was hopelessly lost in sin and degradation to the point that he was nearly dead from starvation and exposure. His physical life, not only his spiritual life, they were both at stake, and his life was ebbing away. He was literally starving to death. Then he remembers his home. He thinks, maybe I could go home. It's the only course open to him. The only way he can survive is to go home, and maybe someone will have mercy on him. Maybe his father. But he also knows his older brother will be waiting for him to punish him, and the whole village will shun him at least. And maybe since his selfishness has made all their lives harder, maybe they will beat him. Maybe they will kill him in their anger and their desire for justice and revenge. So the younger son comes up with a plan, and this is an important detail, the younger son's plan. He practices a speech. He will say, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your servants." He says this to himself over and over again, probably practicing a really humble and contrite voice, because he reasons if his father allows him to become a slave, then he can learn a trade and at least support himself in the village and not starve to death. Notice Jesus never says the younger son repents. He doesn't feel bad about having broken his father's heart and having broken all his family ties. At this point, what he's mainly worried about is his own survival. He's starving to death, he's hungry, and this is his central motivation. He just wants to stay alive. He's not sorry for what he's done, he just doesn't want to die. Now, here's the incredible part. Jesus tells the listening Pharisees and the scribes that this father, when he sees his son still a long way off, runs to him. In the Middle East, first of all, this younger son had no right to just walk home. He would have had to wait at the edge of the village and send a messenger to his father, and then wait for days to see if his father would respond and agree to meet with him. But this father runs. He runs to his son as soon as he recognizes him. Lutheran theologian Harry Wendt says, even today in the Middle East, when people hear this parable of Jesus, they smile when they hear that part about the father running to meet his son. It's because old men in the Middle East do not run. Little boys run, teenagers run, old men walk with dignity. They walk slowly. But the father runs because he must get to his boy ahead of the villagers. See, his son had sinned not only against the father, but against the whole community, and they had every right to beat him and to drive him out. He was no longer part of the community, so the father had to outrun the angry villagers who had pronounced this son guilty beyond redemption, unforgivable. The father has to get there first, because how the father receives the son is also how the villagers must receive him also. And by running, the father humiliates himself, because in order to run, he would have to hike up the hem of his robe so that he didn't get his feet tangled up in the hem of his garment. And he would have exposed his legs, his knees, and his undergarments. And everybody would have been pointing and laughing and saying, "Look at him, look at that old fool running. I can see his underwear. Look at that old man making a fool of himself." This detail, the father running to meet his son, this is a metaphor for Jesus' humiliation on the cross on Good Friday. The father running to meet his lost child, to bring him home. That is Jesus dying to bring us home. And when the two meet, the father takes his son in his arms, holds him up, and kisses him. In that culture, an obedient son was permitted to kiss his father's hands. A disobedient son seeking forgiveness only had the right to fall at his father's feet and kiss his father's feet. But this father holds up his son, who is filthy, smells like pigs. He held up his son, did not allow his son to fall to the ground, didn't wait for his son to give his prepared speech. And the father takes over, accepting him back as his son, reinstating him in the household, giving him his best robe, putting a ring on his finger. The robe would have been out of the father's own wardrobe. The ring was off his father's very hand, and this was a symbol of authority. And he put shoes on his son's feet, because slaves would go barefoot, but sons wore shoes. Everyone in the village must now treat the son according to his father's wishes. And then he declares a feast to celebrate. He instructs his family's fatted calf to be on the menu. And the older brother doesn't like this, doesn't want to forgive his brother, but that's another story. We could discuss this parable for a week, and we still would have more to glean from it. But the important thing to know is this is a parable about us. And it's a parable about God's forgiveness. But more than that, it's about how extravagant and everlasting God's grace and mercy is for all of us. And how God is willing to humiliate himself to bring us back into the family, even to the point of humiliating himself upon the cross on Good Friday. If only we would just come home. Because we are the ones who wander away from God. If we feel that God is distant, who has moved? Not God. Or sometimes we are the older brother. We have decided we are the ones who are righteous, and then we feel it's our place to judge the others who have wandered away. But we don't want to forgive them. And God says to us, okay, you have my permission to walk away. But God never disowns us because he always wants reconciliation with us. God is the hound of heaven who pursues us through life, but not to catch us so that he can destroy us and punish us. God pursues us relentlessly, hoping that we will allow ourselves to be caught and allow him to forgive us and bring us home. Human justice, that's where we pursue the criminals so that we can punish them. That's how we do justice. But God's amazing grace pursues sinners so that he can forgive us. But when we sin, we claim ownership of life and the world and every aspect of life. We want to do it on our own, as much as we like for as long as we like, rather than using God's gifts to glorify him and serve others in this village that we call the world. And then finally we hit a wall. We hit a wall and we realize we can't go on the way we've been going. And we want to return to God. And what do we have to bring? Only our empty hands through which we have squandered a fortune. Only our little prepared speeches asking for forgiveness. But even before we can recite our little speech, God rushes out to meet us. He endures the humiliation of the cross of Calvary so that he can welcome us extravagantly ahead of everyone else who has given up on us, against all concepts of justice. But with God's amazing grace, he reinstates us in the family circle, and we who once were lost are found.